COVID-19 case scenario. This is unlikely to be the situation that Australia will hit, but it is if we don't suppress the epidemic and we have to go to work because the economy is blowing up and like things are going very badly. So I'm going to give a content warning. Some people call these things trigger warnings, but I think it's useful. If you are super stressed right now about like the world ending, if you know you get affected by conspiracy theories easily, if you don't like thinking about like very large scale death and destruction and possible like existential risks to society, maybe look away, because I will be going into the very worst case scenario, but I do pick it up with a little bit of pep at the end, because there are some positives in this situation. So the worst case scenario, I'll go through the steps of what I think is the absolute worst case scenario, and some of these things are very, very reasonable. So the first one is that COVID-19 spreads throughout the world to billions, especially in the developing world, killing potentially tens of millions. Now, we're very good at social isolating in this country because we have a lot of resources. We're naturally well spaced apart. We've got infrastructure that allows us to do things like food home delivery and don't have to get onto public transport to go shopping. Most of us are going by individual transport, but that's not the case around the world. In Africa, there are lots of people who are living in very cramped conditions. You say, oh, don't leave your home. If your home is a metal box in amongst a whole heap of other metal boxes, you are leaving home, like by proxy. You can't actually sit in the one spot for 24 hours a day for 3 weeks or 9 weeks or however long this is going to take. So isolation is going to be very hard for the developing world, especially Africa and the rural parts of India as well. So that could be very dangerous for those populations. Now, they're typically a lot younger than the West, but it could still kill tens of millions of people who have other comorbidities. They have absolutely no ICU infrastructure to support anyone who does get sick. So yeah, this is a very big risk. The next big risk is that a vaccine or treatment is not found. And this is where I go into absolute rant mode. The government, after going on about their stimulus measure, this is their press release. This is $2.6 million for coronavirus research. 2.6 million, that's with an M. When you compare that to the coronavirus stimulus payment, which is $192 billion with a B, that's an enormous difference. Now, there is other information about other programs. In total, they're planning to spend $30 million over 2 financial years. $30 million over 2 financial years. So you've got $192 billion for economy stimulus and $30 million for trying to solve the thing that is destroying our economy. 6,400 times more spent on the economy stimulus than on stopping the infection. So that's such an unreasonable level that I have to put it into real terms. This is a picture from a satellite thing that we sent out. It's the Pioneer plaque. We sent it out into the outer solar system. I gave it a bit of modesty for the YouTube algorithm. So if 1.7 meters is equal to $192 billion, COVID research money is 0.2 millimeters. Like you can't measure it with your regular ruler. It's that small, like 0.2 millimeters. Put another way, think about it in terms of a year. 2020 is 365 days long. So that's, let's say it's $92 billion worth. In time equivalent, we are spending 1.3 hours trying to solve the COVID infection. 1.3 hours on 365 days, 24 hours per day. it's insane. Like it's a number that I can't even this doesn't communicate it that well. Like, I'm talking about 365 days, 24 hours per day. It's not even 1.3 hours of your working year, which is like 200 days, 8 hours a day. It's such a small amount of money. And there is a real risk that even if we doubled it, tripled it, quadrupled it, 10 times, 100 times, that we won't even get it, because we've been working on a common cold vaccine since the 1950s. So everyone who's like, don't worry, we just need to lock down for 18 months. Yeah, you should do some research into what research we've done in terms of vaccines, because a vaccine being found is very, very, very far from certain, especially with the absolute piss weak funding that we've been given so far. The next step is COVID-19 becomes permanent, either by insufficient people attaining long-term resistance to form herd immunity. We aren't going to get to herd immunity in our country, most probably, if we keep this up. But there's also possible features of the epidemic which show that you aren't, like, it's possible to get reinfected, and we don't know how many people. Like, is this a once-off? Does it happen to a lot of people? Like, how long does this immunity last? We actually don't know. This virus is only a few months old, and we don't know how long this immunity will last, or if enough people will get immunity at all. The other element of this is that so many people could become infected that it allows enough evolution in the virus that such that it becomes a seasonal affliction. So we end up with COVID-20 or COVID 2021 and so on. And that is a real risk. We have that in the flu. And there's the potential that the COVID, COVID 2020, COVID 21 kills 5% of those who are elderly or who have other comorbidities, especially ones related to obesity, lung issues, heart issues, diabetes, etc., etc. So just to give you context on what it's like, this is the data on the 2017 flu outbreak in Australia, and it killed what's estimated to be 1,255 people. Now, our recording for this sort of stuff is not very good. Like, when do you count it as old age versus flu? It's not going to be perfect for that. But it is quite likely that if we get a routine COVID infection, that it would be 10 times that, based on 5% of very, very old people dying from it each year. So that's a lot of people. You're talking about 10,000 people dead per year just from COVID in Australia. And that's in comparison to a very high infection rate for Australia. So 2017 was a particularly bad year compared to usual. So this is going to be serious. So if it takes off, if it goes around the world and comes back again slightly different and kills more people, then this is going to be an issue. So the next one is that the constant and unending infection pressure leads to resource constraints. We'll have an inability to keep people at home constantly, and we won't have the ability to treat people who need treatment because we can't produce all the things that we need to do that. We'll have inflation, we'll have poverty. Now, just off this year, ignoring all other like supplementary economic effects, we're looking at 10% unemployment rate in Australia not too long from now. That is very high, very real. If COVID gets cured, we'll likely jump back. Like, we have lots of stimulus, people want to go out, people want to have a drink and, have a meal and be with their friends and all this kind of stuff. There's going to be a big rebound. But if there's not a big rebound, if it's constant lockdowns because we can't stop people dying and stop people being infected, it'll go 10% for a long time, or possibly even higher for a long time. And that's going to be a really big problem. Already in this financial year, we are up on our government spending by 38%. So it's $192 billion for the COVID-19 stimulus. That compares to our prior year budgeted Social Security of $180 billion. Like, we're up to $192 billion extra. And we don't have extra money. Like, our government revenue is going to be down in the next year. People will be taking their losses. People will be reporting less income. It is not going to be a $500 billion budget for taxation receipts. It's just not. So where's that coming from? Money printers go, like, we are literally printing money. We are creating debt on a large scale. And you might be looking at this going, haha, rich people are screwed. But that's not actually how it works, because the people who have the big debts are rich people, and debts go down in real terms. So if the real value of money goes down, the real value of debts go down. So you were leveraged on your house at 80% before, and now money has lost half its value. Your leverage has gone down to 40%. So you're actually a lot better off if you were rich enough to begin with to own investment properties or to leverage your stock portfolio and all that kind of stuff. Then, in addition to that, wages go down in real terms and welfare goes down in real terms. Now, we have had a pump up in our welfare, but if wages go down in real terms and welfare goes down in real terms, I doubt that the government would come in and just keep printing money to keep it going up. But even if they did, then it could further add to that inflation. So there's a real problem here in terms of a issue of inflation that could be facing Australia, which could lead to, a very big problem with poverty. And it's not just Australia, it's the whole world. Every single country is doing this. We don't know what will happen. This is like the biggest and fastest and hopefully shortest monetary stimulus that we've ever had. But if it turns into a long-term one, we don't actually have a baseline to compare this to. Like, we don't. Not even communist countries worked under a different assumption, where the government controls resource allocation and all this kind of stuff. We are nominally still in a capitalist economy, but we are potentially eating into that capitalist economy at, a greater and greater rate. So who knows what happens. The final point that I want to talk about, which is possibly one of the scarier ones, is resource constraints that could lead to political instabilities that affect global superpowers, leading to internal riots, civil war, and maybe opportunistic military actions. So while this is all going on, if the main thing that we're worried about right now is not dying from being infected by COVID, how much attention are you going to be paying to this? Like, how much are we going to be like, okay, Putin is a big threat to American democracy. Are we going to be paying attention to that at all? I'm not sure that we will, or we won't. The world won't be looking at it as much as it would ordinarily. In the face of this crisis, the country that was worst affected by it to begin with is now, continuing its expansionary claims over the South China Sea. And I think rightfully so, will be paying less attention to this. But if we allow that to go on, like, what happens when Philippines loses an island that actually has people on it, that actually has economic output? Like, what happens? It is a scary situation that when you have resource-constrained countries, gets worse. And that actually happened in World War II. You think, Germany, we smashed them, we took away all their value, made them pay reparations. There's no way they can raise an army. And they did. and they went across Europe and caused all sorts of problems. And the same situation could happen now, where people get desperate, where political leaders see opportunity and they take control. So that is, like I was saying, worst case scenario. But to end on a high note, there are positives out of this. We have an increase in collegiality in the face of these multiple crises: bushfires, climate change, COVID-19, which I've misspelt. And then we have a conservative PM in the UK that was saved by public healthcare, a party that was eager to get rid of it now probably won't do it for another generation of politicians. In Australia, we have a doubling of welfare, and amongst the greater population, an understanding of the fragility of their own wealth. Before this situation, most people were probably like, those dull bludgers, they should just get a job. Well, what happens if there are no jobs? Everyone just got a flavor of that. There might be no jobs. So hopefully that we'll get more collegiality out of that. And then this one's very controversial. It's something that communist groups like to take advantage of a bit. But political destabilization can have negative effects, but it can also have positive effects for disrupting the status quo. So if you say, well, capitalism is not tuned correctly to give a fair share to everyone, maybe we should tune it a little bit so we still have capitalism but give a bit more to the lower classes. People might go, oh, don't rock the boat. You don't want to disrupt a good thing while it's growing. That sentiment becomes, we're sinking, what can we do? So there's less controversy about proposing more ambitious interventions into our society to improve our quality of life.